Joining us tonight is Jake Rattlesnake.
I like to go by Lord Rattlesnake or Lord Jake, most base chat of all the lands.
You don't have an argument. Present your paper or shut up.
Everyone's view is definitely inherently biased. So this is when debate becomes very interesting. I can hear what you're saying, but then I can see that you're dressed as a cat.
I'm a dog.
You said you like to go play fetch.
Wolf, yes.
So how does that tie into your relationship? Like, what are you looking for if you're a dog? I think that John Jr. will be president one day. If I was a gambling man, I'd put money on that.
Founder of Rattlesnake TV, Jake. Man, I really appreciate it, dude.
What's up, Jay? How are you, man?
I'm doing great, dude. Glad to be back with you.
It's always a pleasure. Always a pleasure. Let me just move these screens around here because it looks like I'm looking away from you. You never know what it's going to look like on the stream as opposed to StreamYard.
I don't blame you looking away. If I look directly at you, you're going to get scared.
That's true. That's true. All right, that looks better. All right, guys, we've got the one and only Jay Dyer with us today. We're going to be talking about the Candace Owens Looking Glass, the ancient Sumerian technology that the CIA has gotten their hands on, and Charlie Kirk being a time traveler. We're going to talk about that theory, the origins of that, where it comes from, and what have you. We're going to go into some geopolitics, regime change, Iran, Venezuela, all these different types of operations that are happening, the US's current position in global politics, maybe a bit of global reserve currency, where Jay sees that going, the BRICS nations, these types of things. We're going to go into a little bit of Kabbalah as well, and then I want to pick Jay's brains about apologetics basics, and debate skills and tactics, and how we can all get better at that. So, Jay, for those of you who haven't explored your work before, tell us a bit about where they can find you.
You can find me on my website, jaysanalysis.com. Everything there is kind of the central hub, including my archive of the last 10 years of interviews, lectures, debates, comedic material. You can find me on the Alex Jones Show, usually on Fridays, but today didn't work out. But you can find me on YouTube under my name. You can find me on Instagram under my name, and you can find my books at my shop at the website. Very nice, very nice. So, I mean, we'll talk about it off camera. I'm not sure how much you're able to divulge, but what have you got going on this year? Well, it looks like we may, if everything goes well, have a debate with Stefan Molyneux. That's going to be a round 2 on atheism. We might have some more whatever podcast debates in the near future. We might have some other big names that I can't name right at the moment. But beyond that, I think we're going to have another big conference down in Florida, Orthodox conference, with some big names when that gets all kind of inked. So it's going to be, I think, a popping off year. And thanks to you, we've had some clips popping off, and all the clips channels are kind of expanding the audience. So I think 2026 is going to be a big one. Yeah. What did you think about the tier list? It looks like there's a bit of a trend going now, people doing the various tier lists of apologists and stuff like that. Yeah, I appreciate you guys giving me the props. Yeah, there's a couple places I disagree with you guys. I disagreed with Trent Horn being kind of high up. I think Trent Horn's a little overrated, but otherwise, I think you guys are pretty much spot on. And I was kind of surprised to see Jake, the Muslim meta retard, giving me such a high position. What did he say? He ranked me in the top tier as well, because I don't know why. I figured he would have put me in the bottom, but we'll see. Well, I mean, if you look at it objectively, it's pretty much undeniable at this stage, though. Well, you're too kind, dude. Yeah. But was there anyone that we were missing on there? Anyone that you particularly think is a really good apologist? Who, I mean, contemporary, there's not that many. So I think you guys had most people that I could think of. But I mean, I would have put Bonson probably on there, but I mean, Bonson's technically not contemporary because he died in the 90s. But so yeah. Otherwise, you guys are right. Nice. All right, man. Well, one of the big news stories of this week has been Candace Owens' new theory. Now, look, at the start, I was thinking, all right, she's like maybe poking a few holes here and there, poking a few holes in FBI narratives. There was the text messages, there was the meetings in the Hamptons, these sorts of things, and it definitely piqued my curiosity. And I thought that there was some decent investigative journalism going on there. But it seems like
almost it's gone into this place now where it's like the fix has to be fed, and there has to be a show, so there has to be a theory, so there has to be all this crazy stuff happening. And the most recent one is that the CIA has access to ancient Sumerian technology in a looking glass, and that Charlie Kirk was privy to this, and that Charlie Kirk was a time traveler and disturbed the continuum or something like that. So how did you see that? Like, am I getting that right?
Yeah, I played multiple clips on my live stream last night where she's taken it, and that's exactly what I predicted it. So I got into this maybe a month and a half or so ago because I didn't really have a whole lot of time to follow a lot of this, Charlie Kirk speculation stuff. I kind of assumed that, the government's probably not telling the truth, and like you, I thought, well, this is probably, some good questions to ask initially. And then the plane drama was a little weird. There was some holes in that I saw. Crowder's video, I think, did a good job critiquing. And then Alex did a critique too, back 6 weeks ago or 4 weeks ago. And then it just sort of got a little bit weirder. So I actually tuned in. I was like, I'm going to check out what her whole thesis is. I'm going to follow this. And then I noticed a pattern that something I've seen, analyzing alt media and mainstream media for 15, 20 years, is that people want to, it's almost like episodes of a drama where you have next week's episode's got to be up the ante, even more extreme, more intense. It's like, to X-Files next week for the craziest monster of the week episode. So that's what it was. And I said, watch, what's going to happen is she's going to take it to the next level. It's going to be an even wilder yarn that she spins next month, making all the so-called conspiracy theorists look bad, making us look like a bunch of idiots. And that's unfortunately where it's gone, because I had a lot of high hopes, when Candace started covering a lot of the Zionist stuff. I thought maybe she's going to be another voice, but unfortunately it's just gotten more and more absurd, and she just quadruples down, doesn't walk it back at all. So that's where we're at, unfortunately.
Yeah, so what exactly is it? Because I know that there is a theory out there, or maybe there is some evidence out there, that a part of the Middle Eastern wars was I don't know anything about it. I just know the surface level. I maybe watched a video on it a few years ago or something, that there was some sort of like ancient technology or whatever that was in Iraq. Is there any credence whatsoever to this?
Not that I'm aware of. I mean, you have sometimes people mentioning this kind of stuff. I think one of the Hillary emails mentioned.
That's right. That's what I was. Yeah, that's what I remember.
There was mention of something like, relics or ancient relics, but that doesn't mean that it was some sort of advanced, History Channel ancient aliens technology. I mean, it just gets so absurd, and there's no evidence for any of that. So that's sort of the yarn that I think she was connecting it to, and maybe a little bit of CERN thrown in there for good measure. A lot of the conspiracy classic type stuff, which is pretty fringe arena material. Which if she had stuck to critiquing Zionism and calling out Bibi, that kind of stuff, that might have been a little more grounded. But it's just gotten crazier and crazier in order to also, in gonzo journalism style, put herself into the story. So you'll notice all these stories also are about her. They're coming after her. Mossad, French intelligence is sending, their operatives. The Foreign Legion, the CIA was also there. And then there's tunnels. And it just keeps changing, because every week has to be this cliffhanger that brings you to the next dopamine hit of the craziest, most wild speculation. And again, if you go and see her comments, it's all like soccer moms and Karens.
Yes, I've noticed that.
We're not talking about rational, patriarchal, logos-minded dudes that are working through the evidence. We're not talking about guys that have been in Black Ops or veterans, because most of those guys that comment on this say that she's full of it. And I think it's pretty obvious when you get into this, particularly with the Mitch Snow story. His whole narrative crumbled. It was obvious that he was a grifter pretty quickly. How does a guy who's a Black Ops Green Beret vet get imprisoned in the garage by his wife who breaks his thumbs? I mean, the stories are just preposterous. And then, of course, turns out that guy was, a psychopath, and all of his stories made absolutely no sense. You don't stumble onto Fort Huachuca and accidentally wander into a skiff and hear colonels planning an assassination. It doesn't work that way. And, anytime I had people defending this position, I asked them to call in, and anytime they would call in, I would ask them, I said, well, can you tell me a couple books that you've read on assassinations, or anybody that you've interviewed? I've interviewed the biggest hitman in the world multiple times, so I know a little bit about it. I'm not an expert on assassinations, and nobody has any knowledge of this. So it's all just like, wine mom gossip or something at the soccer match, mom's gossiping. So anyway, I'm rambling, but you get the idea. And then it just sort of got to the next level with, she's relying on her dreams. She's relying on Marian feast days, that she had a prayer the day of the Immaculate Conception and blah, blah, blah. And that told her intuitively. And so it's just getting more and more absurd. And really the only question at this point, I think, is it an actual sort of break in terms of psychosis? Is it schizophrenia? And I don't mean that in a mean, vindictive way. I don't have any animosity. Really just being honest and objective in the analysis. Is it disinformation, COINTELPRO style stuff? Is she being handled? Or, is this just grifting? It could be any of those things.
Yeah. Have you ever seen that meme where it's like the woman looking in the mirror and then it just says, now go and make it about you? kind of seems that way. Then the recent one was that Charlie was, monitored from a young age, and he was, prepped and molded to do this, and that Candace also, they tried to get her into the smart school, the special smart school, but she said no. So she really dodged a bullet with that. So it is.
I was in the GATE program. I could speak to that. I was in California in the GATE program, gifted and talented. GATE, gifted and talented education, GATE. That's what it stands for. So I was in
like he said, the GATE program.
No, everybody makes that joke. In fact, we did a Sam Hyde episode about that, and we were calling it the GATE program. So yeah. No, I wasn't in the GATE program. I was in the straight program. I promise.
The chat can have fun with that.
I was in the GATE program. We had to write like this. So
yeah.
I
wouldn't be surprised if these days they had the GATE program,
No, that is what education is now. It's the GATE program. So state education literally is that. All it was just the sort of smart kids being kind of given their own curricula and put into other programs. Where we did a lot of artistic stuff and not so much a lot of like rote memorization type stuff. So there wasn't any MK Ultra. There was no Professor X, picking out new mutants or any of this nonsense. But that's the way that she's sort of blown this up, based on, again, the popularity of this theory on TikTok, right? So if you go to TikTok and you look up the GATE program in the last year, this wild narrative has been spun through a bunch of idiotic TikTokers that the GATE program was this secret, MK Ultra, Stranger Things type thing, where they're picking the smart kids and trying to turn them into literal X-Men, all of which is nonsense. That's not what the GATE program was.
And you would have looked into this stuff. In terms of the Skull and Bones societies and all these sorts of things, there is some level of grooming that goes on. Like if I was an elite and I was looking for people to come in and fill the cabinets of the various different countries that I wanted to fill the cabinets of, like a Klaus Schwab or something like that, then I would look at the Ivy Leagues and I'd be like, who's going to be the future leaders? Let me influence these guys.
Absolutely. No, that's legitimate. That does happen. But that's not what the GATE program was, and that's not what there's no evidence that Charlie Kirk was some sort of chosen, groomed person because he would disrupt the time continuum. And we gotta have Marty McFly and Doc Brown find a flux capacitor somehow to take us back and fix the time continuum. It's somebody said on Twitter, I thought it was pretty funny. It was like, you could tell what movies she's been watching lately from her conspiracy theories. So she must have watched The Matrix, Back to the Future, and Inception, because like the stories kind of match up to that. And I was like, yeah, it sounds like X-Files to me too. But
do you know what this whole looking glass thing is, though? It is allegedly some sort of ancient Sumerian technology. Like, what's the lore behind that?
Well, first, I would say some of these projects are real, and we try to do, on my channel with the people that we've interviewed, I try to do as best I can with actually finding real elite documents and reading the real things and not relying on, secondhand speculation. But I think, at the level of Candace and people like that, there's really no vetting going on, which is kind of odd to be that large of a channel and to not vet sources like Mitch Snow or documents. So I'm not aware of, and I haven't found, I'm not saying it doesn't exist, but I've not yet seen the actual document about this. I'm not saying that it couldn't exist. There is the Gateway Process, which Dr. David Patrick Harry and I did a live stream on that because we actually went and found the document and read it. And this is, if you look at stories like men who stare at goats, right? That's a real project where they were studying things like remote viewing at Stanford Research. There is the Stargate project. So these things are real where they study this stuff. But Stargate got shut down because they really couldn't reproduce the work. There was limited success with remote viewing. The other projects with mind powers and all this nonsense. If you've seen Men Who Stare at Goats, you'll know what I'm talking about because it's got
Men Who Stare at Goats. It's a movie.
It's a George Clooney movie based on a John Ronson book.
Right.
So it's a real project with the First Earth Battalion, which was a bunch of military guys that were trying to sort of experiment with mind powers, psychic powers, remote viewing, etc. But they had limited success with this. And again, Stargate project, that's real, but there's not any evidence beyond some of the studies of like meditation, which is in the Gateway Process document. Beyond that, there's no evidence of time travel or seeing into the future. All of that's nonsense. People have to understand too, sometimes the CIA declassifies things that are just publications that somebody wrote that they had for some reason classified. It might have been somebody's name that was mentioned. It could have been anything. Just because something's declassified doesn't mean that, oh, this was a real, government operation. For example, there was some document declassified that was a large speculative publication some years back that dealt with pole shifts. Okay, well, that doesn't mean that there's going to be a pole shift. It just means that there was a document declassified that in many of the pages happened to mention this speculative theory. So in the same way, even if there is some document, I mean, they can declassify fake documents or things that really weren't even successful or real projects. So that has nothing, the fact that it's declassified has nothing to do with whether it's actually valid or not. So I would say there are other things called Operation Looking Glass, which have to do with like Air Force and military stuff, but I don't think there is any real technology of seeing into the future. It's a bunch of nonsense.
Right. Just to let you guys know that we'll read super chats in between every segment. So we're going to be doing a bunch of different topics today. In between, we'll basically just read anything that's like yellow and up. So any final thoughts on that whole situation there, like what your predictions are in the future, where you see that whole situation going with Candace and, Ian Carroll and these sorts of figures who are quite popular these days?
Well, I think that she's kind of locked into quadrupling down, so I don't expect her anytime soon to back off. In other words, we've seen this pattern pretty consistently. She's just going to keep upping the ante. In fact, she even hinted that the mystical Sumerian Wakanda technology suddenly stopped working in 2012. I mean, what? Like, that's Mayan calendar bullshit. I don't think anybody believes in the Mayan calendar 2012 nonsense. And it was just really weird for her to tie that into that. And I mean, there's something going on with, she seems to think that, all of reality is sort of turning around her and Charlie Kirk, which to me is in an Orthodox church, we would call that delusion or prelest.
Right. What does prelest mean again?
Prelest is a spiritual delusion. So it's more than just kind of being deluded or arrogant. It's actually thinking that God is talking to me and sending me these messages and I don't have to listen to anyone else sort of, checking me or, firewall, giving me some feedback because God's talking to me. Right. So it's a supreme form of kind of spiritual delusion where you think you're kind of anointed and God's, using you.
Yeah. Get a lot of that with the various, like some of the weird sort of sects of Christianity out there.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, I had a long.
Well, she's influenced by the sort of charismatic vein of Catholicism, and so unfortunately, the Roman Catholic Church has, for the last few decades, adopted the Pentecostal charismatic, methodology where you just sort of have these experiences, and that's supposedly God talking to you, and that's the proof itself. Right? How do I know? Well, God, that's God. God's my feelings. God's the one that's gibbering through me through these speaking in tongues. But of course, in Scripture, tongues are just languages. There's no gibberish. So she's actually influenced by this sort of charismatic Catholicism.
I had a long chat a few weeks ago with a random Protestant, and I was trying to understand why they thought what they thought. It was like in like a personal life sort of conversation, and we were going around in circles because I was sort of saying, look, like the Bible, it's good. Like I think that it's good to obviously read Scripture and to know Scripture and these sorts of things, but it's not my job to interpret the Scripture. And this is why we've got like thousands of years of saints and all of these different theologians who can tell me that. Like I could spend my whole life trying to interpret the Bible and I would come to so many wrong conclusions that it would be ridiculous. So this is why I appreciate the idea of, church authority and having that structure as opposed to everybody just doing their own interpretations. And every time I feel a feeling, that's like God speaking to me. And we're going around in circles because they just kept saying, no, I know what this means and I can interpret it because God tells me, God's speaking to me and I read the words of God. And I was like, well, how do you differentiate if I believe this and you believe this and we read the same scripture? What's the threshold breaker here?
Right.
And they just were like, well, God told me. Like it's bizarre in my mind.
Yeah, it's a recipe for disaster and sort of delusion, and hence that term prelates. I mean, we have in Orthodox Church, for example, there's checks and balances. Nobody has this sort of, lone wolf anointing kind of thing. We do believe in God moving you and speaking to you in special ways, but in our framework, there's always spiritual authorities and other people that you bounce that off of. For example, if I was to ever have some kind of vision or experience, I would talk to my spiritual father about that. And he's a virtuous, honorable husband priest that I've known for many, many years. And I trust him because I know that he's not going to steer me in the wrong direction. I have other friends like Father Deacon Dr. Ananias, people that would give me good counsel. And, in the Protestant world, you don't really have that. It's just sort of you on your own, doing your own thing. But you actually need that checks and balance, we would say, precisely because we are so susceptible to pride. We're so susceptible as fallen human beings to trusting in our own hearts. And if you read the book of Jeremiah, for example, there's a section where Jeremiah says that the false prophets trust in a vision of their own hearts that they think is God, but they're actually confirming and believing a deception.
Yeah, I'm halfway through The Soul After Death by Seraphim Rose at the moment.
Oh, cool.
He's probably my favorite of the saints that I've read. I just like how dense the books are with information. There's not much waffling that goes on. It's just like interesting topic, boom, 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 facts. Great book. I actually stole it from the Wilsons. I need to send them a new copy, but he does talk about this, about seeing apparitions and these sorts of things. You don't want to take it at face value. You want to actually go and approach your spiritual father or somebody about this, as opposed to just seeing a ghost or even like a dead family member or something like this. And it goes all into out-of-body experiences and astral projection and what the Orthodox view is on this. And it's super interesting stuff.
Yeah, that's a great one. You'd also probably like his book, Orthodoxy and the Religion of the Future, because that gets into
I read that.
Yeah. Oh, cool.
That's a great book. Yeah.
The other one that's really good from him is Nihilism, Roots of the Revolution, because it's kind of a presuppositional critique of Marxism, socialism, communism, and most of what we know as modern leftism. He does a really good critique of that.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's get through some super chats here and then we'll move on. Jordan says, Jay, congrats on being the first black woman on Rattlesnake TV to be in a positive light.
Mm-hmm. Well, we all know who the real queen is, and it ain't Candace. I'll tell you that right now.
Sniper Mike gifted 5. Thank you, Sniper Mike. Anthony says, great collab. Hope you guys do this more. Hope you had a great birthday yesterday, Jay. This year's going to be great for you both. Birthday yesterday, hey? Happy birthday.
Thank you. Yeah, I just turned sweet 16. Got me a nice little Grand Dam out there, ready to take it for a spin. Thank you guys so much. Everybody's really generous in Super Chats. Appreciate that.
Yeah. Cam says the CIA has the observatory from Assassin's Creed.
Yeah, I remember there's some kind of future vision tech in Assassin's Creed, so that's funny. I'm surprised that, by the way, we're only like a week or two away from the next episode of Candace's X-Files where she goes full Wakanda or Yakub, right? So when is Yakub going to appear? It's got to be soon.
Moment Killer says, God bless brothers, keep up the Lord's work. Thank you, sir. Appreciate that. Dishwasher Safe Speculum says, thank you, Jay, for traveling back to do this interview.
Okay. If you watch Candace, she'll go, okay.
Cam says, California is kind of like a gay program anyways. True.
All of California is the gay program. Yeah.
Yeah. Giovanni says, yeah, Jake, is that what you want to do today? Talk about Venezuela? They're making fun of my Venezuela.
Venezuela.
Blaine says, I came back from 2049 to donate this. Thank you. I appreciate all the time traveling brothers out
Hopefully,
there.
I'm the Pope of the future and not Candace. I know that, probably by then we'll have a black woman Pope, but hopefully it's me and not her.
All right, next one I wanted to get into, other big story of the week is obviously the United States' role in global politics. So it appears to me, and let me know what you think about this, right? It appears to me as though there is a shifting of the power of the great power politics happening in the world right before our eyes. You've got the BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and the adjacent countries as well. And their express goal seems to be to knock the US off its perch as the global reserve currency, to trade in yuan, to even create their own sort of trading currency so that they don't have to rely on the US dollar anymore, and they don't have to be or fall victim to sanctions, if you will, and these types of things. And now it looks to me as though one of the reasons is though Trump is trying to get Greenland and he's deposed Maduro is to maybe consolidate a little bit of power, consolidate the United States' position as the global superpower. Do you think that that's too simplistic? Is there a lot more going on at play there?
No, also what could be happening is because the U.S. economy is pretty bad, seizing these resources could also be just another source of resource money. So, Venezuela having all the oil, basically, top oil producer, that could be a lot of revenue because the U.S. economy is pretty much screwed. There's no way out of the debt, given the usury-based, fiat printing model that we've adopted since 1913. So there's no way out of that other than just seizing resources. And unfortunately, when you have a gigantic Ouroboros of debt, as we have, like it's almost like it forces people to engage in these activities to maintain the imperium. And we have an empire, whether we acknowledge that or not. Even Brzezinski said it's a U.S. imperium. So I think you're right to point to those factors, but also, we seem to be, even in foreign Middle Eastern countries media, it was reported that some of these actions in Venezuela were actually at the behest of foreign Middle Eastern countries. If you grasp what I'm saying, so that's a big part of this too, is doing what our allies tell us to do. And I think that's a little bit surprising because people wouldn't think of Venezuela as that. But one of my good friend Tristan, he lives in Ecuador and he knows Latin South American politics very well. And he sent me a ton of information on this, which actually confirms that there was quite a bit of foreign interference, shall we say, in Venezuela. And that doesn't mean that I'm saying socialism's good. It's not. It's really a false dialectic between the neoliberal IMF shock doctrine, debt slavery model, or do you want to be in the socialist debt slavery trap model? Both of those are bad. They're both a false dialectic. So there's really no easy answer for America's, Pax Imperium, Pax Americana in Latin South America. But the same model, as you're pointing to, I think with regime change, is the same. It's the color revolution model that's being used. There's just straight up regime change. They're also going to use the same, strategy with Iran. Israel's been calling for the installment of the relative of the Shah as the next leader of Iran. But the CIA and British intelligence had an alliance with the Ayatollahs as well. So is when the revolution happened, the CIA was right there in the middle of that as well. So there's a lot going on, but suffice to say that the reason these things happen is ultimately for resource control and for, as you said, geopolitical stuff.
Right.
Strategic stuff.
So there's this argument that you've got the
Are you there? I lost you.
Lost you there for a sec. You back?
Yeah, I don't know, maybe the internet or Streamlabs or StreamYard froze or something. But yeah, I was trying to say somebody came in and distracted me. Geostrategic purposes, right? So to make sure that there's a unipolar world, not a multipolar world. That's what the BRICS stuff is about. Russia, China, India creating a multipolar world. So yeah, I forgot to mention BRICS. Sorry.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's this argument that you've got the clean break memo, late 1990s, all of these countries that they wanted to destabilize, overthrow, so that basically the Israelis can be the hegemon in that region in the Middle East. A lot of these countries got overthrown. The leaders got deposed: Syria, Iraq, Libya, these different countries. And then the theory goes that Iran is sort of like the last one on the chopping block. They get rid of Iran, and then the Israelis have achieved their goal of being the hegemon in that region. Do you give credence to that theory?
Oh, absolutely. It's Oded Yanon, and it's the clean break memorandum. So yeah, we did some live streams on that 6 or 7 months ago when the Iran stuff was really popping off. I went back and read those, and then had a kind of a pseudo debate with David Wood and Apostate Prophet on all of that. But yeah, those memorandums are absolutely the game plan. And that really makes sense of why the U.S. has done everything that it's done in the Middle East for the last 20, 30 years.
So I was watching a debate on this exactly with Dave Smith and Coleman Hughes. You might have seen this debate where Coleman Hughes was saying, well, why is this such a significant memorandum? There are thousands of memorandums that will come across the desk of the intelligence agencies in the United States. This was just some random piece of paper, and people are grabbing this and acting like this is some sort of a really significant thing. Do you think that it is as significant in terms of their actual geopolitical strategy, or is it just a random piece of paper memorandum that some guy in the office drafted up?
Well, I mean, Netanyahu's memorandum and the strategy being followed, and it lining up in many ways with the Oded Yanon strategy, is not just any random memorandum. So no, that's just completely not true. That's to ignore the fact that the U.S., engaged in these actions to support Israeli policy there. It's not every single one of them. I mean, there's mentions, for example, of trying to create a Christian government in, I think, Egypt, like a Coptic Christian government in Egypt. Well, that didn't happen. So the argument is not that every single thing successfully was achieved, but it shows you a general layout and strategy, and it doesn't mention all these countries, and they have all been toppled except for Iran. But that doesn't mean that Iran is like, I don't really view Iran as a 100%, anti-Western force. There's a lot of backdoor deals. I mean, if you read Viktor Ostrovsky's books, Mossad sold a lot of armaments to Iran on the down low. So there's a lot of backdoor deals that make even a lot of this just kind of dialectics. And, exactly what will happen in the long term is hard to say. But I mean, we are really obviously following, the Zionist policy in the Middle East. It shouldn't even be questionable at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is pretty self-evident by this stage for sure. So in terms of this Shah's son, this guy, from what I've seen, has basically never really had a job or anything. He comes from a royal family, moved to America after the revolution, hasn't really engaged in much politics himself. So the idea for me that he can just come in and just sort of click his fingers and take over from the Ayatollah seems a bit far-fetched, especially considering the changes in the region since 1979. Like, it's a lot more volatile and dangerous from what I can see. And there are a lot of very hostile non-state actors around. You've got your ISIS and Al-Qaeda, even though, tell me if I'm wrong about this, but they also hate the Ayatollah because they see him as a Shiite clerical apostate. And they kind of hate him, even though they're all Muslims, they're Sunnis and Shias, they don't like each other. And they see the Ayatollah, the Sunnis see the Ayatollah as illegitimate. Even though they don't like the Shah, they also hate the Ayatollah.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, they've been fighting for centuries. So, I mean, they, if you go back to, I'm going from memory here, is it Karbala? The Shia have a whole ceremony where they celebrate battling the Shia. I mean, the Sunni. So, yeah, that's definitely the case. And that's why you have, at times, the Shia have reached out to kind of have more of an alliance with the West or with Christianity because of the opposition of the Sunnis. But ultimately in the long game, if you're an Orthodox Christian, they're all really antichrist powers, because Shia Islam is just another form of Neoplatonism. So in many ways, it's kind of similar to Sufism, but there's nothing really that links it with Christianity ultimately. So there's always going to be the animosity, but in the Middle East, I think that Iran does obviously have designs, because you wouldn't have the assassination of these generals, you wouldn't have Mossad engaging in things like Stuxnet and whatnot if they weren't really trying to have their version of hegemony in the region. So really, every time I say this, everybody gets mad and they say, "Oh, so you're pro-Israel and you're anti-Iran." I really don't think there's any good or bad guys, in this level of geopolitics, and it's just going to be classic tribalism and fighting for regional dominance. So I don't really think the U.S. wins either way, but I also don't necessarily support regime change, and I do think that, I mean, if you get into Shia Islam and look at what they believe, it is a crazy cult.
Really?
Yeah, absolutely.
What makes them more crazy than the Sunnis?
Well, I mean, Shia Islam is a little more mystical, and they're a little more apocalyptic in terms of their, they think of like the end times, and these manifestations are gonna happen in the near future. So a lot of times any kind of like imminent eschatology, end times type stuff can motivate more radical, irrational actions. I mean, rabbinic Judaism is not much better, but no, Shia Islam is an absolutely insane cult.
So what do you see happening there in the future? Because it looks as though you had the Trump strikes on the nuclear facilities in Iran, and then you've got the revolution that looks like it's happening in the street, looks like it's gaining momentum. There's a lot of protesters being killed there at the moment. This could be seen as a grounds for deposing the leader. Do you think that that's going to happen in the near future? Do you think this is going to be a false alarm? And also, why do you think it is that we are seeing this big sort of revolution happening? Do you think that there's foreign involvement and interference? Or do you, like, when I look at it, I tend to think, if I was in Tehran right now, if I was a citizen of Tehran, I'd be looking around me and be thinking, do we really want to go to war? We've had a few strikes that have happened. We haven't really been able to respond. The government isn't as strong as we thought. All of our different proxies are kind of just getting taken out one by one. Do I really want my home to get completely destroyed? Like, it's not a war that we're going to win. Get rid of these guys, have a more Western-friendly government so that we don't go to war and our country doesn't get destroyed. Maybe I'd be thinking that if I was a citizen. But how do you see that going?
Probably. I mean, I know that there's the mullahs are unpopular. That's true. But also, it's such a challenge because, U.S. Leaders like Trump formerly were opposed to these kinds of things. You've had many people saying, let's not have this regime change. Let's not do this. And yet now here we are, supposedly because of the threat to Israel. And so we're probably going to see some sort of, false flag blamed on Iran eventually. You've got to have something to motivate, popular support, because nobody really wants this except for Netanyahu, who's, they've wanted this for a long time. So, and surprisingly, if you remember, the last few rounds of this, Trump didn't do exactly what Netanyahu wanted. Now it looks like, for whatever reason, we are doing all of that. So, who knows what the real game plan is, but I would guess that is probably not going to be successful. I mean, again, you have to understand it's an ideology motivated by a cult. If you talk about Shia in general, and that's not going to operate in a rational way. But yeah, I think it's just bad news all around. I mean, we've had some Orthodox clerics and people warning that we might actually have a big war in 2026 if a lot of this continues.
Wasn't there one? I mean, I remember DPH talking about this. It might even have been with you. He was talking about an Orthodox cleric who said that there would be strikes on Iran and it would come to some sort of a war, and he predicted that ages ago.
I think that's Elder Paisios said that before he died, but he's a pretty recent holy man. But yeah, I think his story was that there would be presages of a big war when it comes to Iran, and then I think something to do with Turkey and Greece, if I recall.
Yeah, well, difficult to see where it's going to go. Witzius came in and said, "Hi, Jay and Jake." Hello, Witzius. Good to see you. Blaine Pasashik says, "Jay, do your Nick Cage impression."
I'm so glad to be here with my good buddy Jake. Jake's probably the best shaman on the internet. He's going to give me a reading later. I've got a bit of a cold, so my Nick Cage is a little off, but
You can't be sick doing the Nick Cage. Not bad, though. Amelia sent 28. Thank you very much, Amelia. Greatly appreciated. All right, what did we have next on the agenda here? Kabbalah. So this is something I'm curious. I've heard you and DPH talk about this a lot in your various streams. It's something that I've listened to a fair bit, but I just still don't understand it at all. Some sort of a mystical practice. It's just one of those things that's so layered. Like, first of all, what is Kabbalah, and what are the origins of Kabbalah?
well, the word just means the tradition, or the received or passed on tradition. So the word is referring to, in some sense, the oral teachings of rabbinic Judaism, and it's the idea that all the way back to Genesis or to the time of the prophets like Ezekiel, there's this oral form of revelation or Judaic tradition that's also been passed down, that's sort of concurrent with the rabbinical written text or the Torah or whatever. But there's also branches of it that get into mysticism, and what you'll find in a lot of Western religions in general, whether it's Hermeticism or whether it's Christianity or Islam, a lot of times they will borrow or utilize the structures of Neoplatonism. So Neoplatonism is later Platonic schools in the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd century that developed Plato and Aristotle into some sort of systematized way to understand the structure of reality. One of the classic examples of Neoplatonism is what's called the Porphyrian tree. If you look that up, it's a tree that's intended to kind of give you the structure or the dimensions that make up reality. And there's all kinds of theories, there's all kinds of schemes, but this is a basic template that's used. And Christianity, Catholicism, Orthodox Christianity, Sufism, Shia Islam, and Judaism, particularly with Kabbalah, have appropriated and utilized Kabbalah and the Porphyrian tree to kind of give meaning and structure to reality beyond just the basics of, Genesis and creation and this kind of stuff. So it's more of a metaphysical thing. And within Kabbalah and Judaism, it gets, in many cases, way more mystical, where you can have practices that include things like magic, sigil magic. There's a medieval Jewish myth called the Golem. You probably heard of the Golem. And this is the idea that through magical incantations, or perhaps even through technology or whatever, and using the words, the Hebrew words and names of God, you can create sort of animatronic or living beings. And I don't even think that Judaism is necessarily the beginning of that idea. You can find that idea in ancient Greece, where some of the philosophers talked about creating sort of technotronic beings or mechanical beings, so to speak. So long story short, a big part of that school of mysticism deals with things like what we would call perhaps computer beings or AI beings, right? If you're a Kabbalistic Jew, you would interpret or think of a lot of things like AI or robotics as a version of the Golem. So there's much more to it than that, but I mean, it kind of branches into Gnosticism at times. A lot of the medieval Jewish Kabbalists were influenced by Christian Gnostics. So they utilize kind of good and evil as flip sides of the same coin principles. So it's all over the place, and every different Kabbalist kind of has its own scheme or system. So that's
just quickly, who is actually do we know that people are practicing this sort of thing these days? And is it a small portion of the Jewish religion? Is it like a weird sect of the Jewish religion, or is it something that's pretty ingrained? Would it be like Orthodox people, or?
Well, I mean, any person within and even without Judaism could conceivably be interested in or have some version of Kabbalism. I mean, for example, many Western esotericists who weren't even Jews, like Aleister Crowley, he borrowed heavily from the Kabbalah. Albert Pike, who wrote the Bible of Masonry, Morals and Dogma, was very influenced by Kabbalah, so he utilizes it. And then we have pop culture figures who've been big promoters of Kabbalah, like Madonna and the LA Kabbalah Center.
Do you reckon they know, though? Do you reckon they know the sort of tradition of what they're actually doing and what they're actually saying? Or do you think that they have various influences around them that make them do these? Because I can't imagine Madonna really sort of looking into any sort of medieval metaphysics.
No, I think in her case, I mean, I'm not saying that what she's into is very well thought out or sensible. I'm not saying that like Madonna is controlling the world through the rabbis. But I mean, I've read she for many years was promoting the Kabbalah Center in LA back to the late 1990s, actually. And I've read some of the material from her Kabbalah Center in LA. And I mean, again, it's not like extremely in depth, like, reading Thomas Aquinas or something like that. But I think, yeah, she absolutely knows that it's medieval, Jewish practice. You can watch old videos of Madonna where she's actually promoting some ideas that are a little more sophisticated and high tier than you would expect her to promote. I mean, it's all demonic, but I'm saying I think she is fairly serious about it. But again, beyond people like that popularize it in the pop world. I mean, you have people like Ashton Kutcher was a big promoter of it, popularly speaking. But in a more serious geopolitical sense, I mean, you have people like Jacques Attali, who's the Kissinger of France. I read his books. He's obviously a pretty systematic devotee of the ideas of it. I mean, he utilizes it in his geopolitical writings. For example, in Brief History of the Future, he predicted in 2006 that we would all be linked into a global hive mind, which he calls the Golem. And he specifically links it to, Kabbalism. You have a lot of people in Hollywood, directors, Darren Aronofsky. His first movie was about Kabbalah. You've ever seen Pi?
No.
Yeah, Pi is pretty famous. I mean, it's a movie about numerology amongst the Jewish Hasidic community, and a guy kind of goes crazy. But most of his movies, I mean, whether it's Mother or whether it's Black Swan, or they're all pretty much Kabbalistic themed movies. So yeah, many people do practice it. Many people are just influenced by it. But I think more so for the geopolitical sphere, it's Hegel who was really influenced by Kabbalah. And he took Kabbalistic ideas of thesis, antithesis, synthesis, and turned that into a way to understand all of reality. And then Karl Marx took that and turned that into dialectics for Marxism and socialism. So actually, when you talk about Marxism, you're actually talking about a form of atheistic Kabbalah, so to speak.
That's really interesting. So, because Hegel was quite sort of spiritual in his in like his philosophy and the things that he believed, and the whole idea of the dialectic, like you said, the thesis, antithesis, and then synthesis. And then Marx translated that into sort of like dialectical materialism. Is that what he calls it? Absolutely. And then a way to view the world and history in the sense that material conditions can just keep on changing and then create different syntheses. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So that actually comes from this Kabbalistic metaphysical way to view the world.
Yeah, I mean, at least there's a very heavy influence, and there's a academic text that covered this. It's called Hegel and Hermeticism. It's written by a professor who's a Hegelian scholar who went and looked back at the many late medieval, esoteric, hermetic influences on Hegel, which a lot of people had not really noticed before. But you have people like Joachim of Fiore, you have people like Giordano Bruno, the famous medieval hermeticist. They were into these ideas, and even though they weren't Jews, they were still influenced by these ideas. And that was a huge influence on Hegel himself, who was pretty much the best way to figure out, to characterize Hegel would be as kind of a version of Neoplatonism, which one of the problems, and I'm not going to spend too much time on this because it's pretty abstruse and boring, but one of the problems in Platonism was always that Plato's ideas and these realms, these manifestations or whatever, they're very static. And so there was always a problem in Platonism to deal with process and change. So in other words, if the realm of the ideas is eternal and static, how does it have anything to do with our realm, which is always in flux and changing? So that was a constant problem in Platonism and Neoplatonism. And one of the things Hegel does is really try to resolve that through process philosophy. So he's a huge proponent of there being these sort of ideals, but they're always sort of in process moving towards what he called the omega point, which is everything becoming self-conscious. And you can find this influence very heavily. I'm sure you mentioned this probably with Dr. David Patrick, I think he would back this up, especially amongst the transhumanists. They're very much into these ideas of Hegel or Teilhard de Chardin and the idea of the noosphere and everything kind of becoming unified into this grand supra-consciousness via the web, the net, the global brain, Jacques Attali's Golem, etc. It's all the same idea.
The idea, and this is like the omega point that is the sort of final destination of the dialectic.
Absolutely. Yep.
Interesting. Okay, so this might be a simplistic question, but do these people believe in God?
I mean, I've got Ray Kurzweil's books. He's sort of the most famous transhumanist, and he says in the books, "I don't believe in God yet." And he basically, and he says some other comments like, "I'll believe in God when I become Him," or something like that. So I mean, it's like, for transhumanism, they tend to believe that it's an emergent deity. It's a deus ex machina. It's a God that will emerge out of the system, meaning, some super AI or whatever. Some of the people, though, I think in that vein could be Kabbalistic. I've got some books by Kabbalistic scholars that are into, AI and transhumanism over there on my shelf. So I would imagine that they just see it as some form of mystical Judaism. I mean, I think you got a whole range of people. I mean, there's people who, like Peter Carroll, who's actually the godfather of modern Satanism and transhumanism, even perhaps before Crowley. And he was kind of the pioneer of techno-paganism and cyberpunk stuff, because he actually thinks that the internet is kind of a form of chaos magic, and that the internet itself will kind of become some sort of like uncontrolled deity. I'm not saying that that's true, but I'm saying so I think you have a range of people's views amongst these technocrats.
But what about, say, like the Kabbalists? Because it kind of appears to me as though, from what you were saying before, that they view the trajectory of humanity in like the reverse way to we. They look at it from man to God, whereas we look at it from God to man. So do they believe in a source or an origin, or are they Big Bang theorist sort of people? Are they're agnostic?
I mean, one of the things I've noticed with, I haven't read a million Kabbalists, but I've read probably 5 or 6 different Kabbalistic texts and views. And I've read the premier Kabbalist of the 20th century was a guy named Gershom Scholem. And I've read 2 or 3 of his books. And he basically just says, you have like this structure of the Neoplatonic tree. And then any individual Kabbalist can come on and kind of like paste on to the structure his version of it. So there's almost as many Kabbalahs as there are Kabbalists, right? So you could read some medieval rabbi like Nachmanides, and he'd have his theory. And then you could read some modern day rabbi or teacher. I don't know any of them off the top of my head, and they would have their own kind of theories. And sometimes they might emphasize number theory and number magic, which again that's really just like Pythagoreanism. That's not anything new. You might find others that emphasize, Orthodox Judaism, and they might actually believe Orthodox Judaism and still be a Kabbalist. So you kind of have, again, it's like any other Western religion. Like you have the more rational strains, and then you have the more mystical, esoteric strains of it, and you could get anybody believing all kinds of things.
Yeah, because these people would really have to believe what they believe, because if you do take the metaphysical realities of the world and the spiritual warfare and the spiritual aspect to life, and if you do believe that your soul is different from your body and that there is some sort of an afterlife, then I would imagine it's a question that people take very seriously if they're not just atheist materialists. But I do wonder sometimes, why would you want to go down when you look at like Aleister Crowley, for example, these Satanists, the people who worship demons, these sorts of things, why would you want to be on that team, for lack of a better way to put it?
I guess probably the most popular reason why would be that those systems offer people a kind of a self apotheosis path. In other words, they offer to you this idea that you can become your own God. So it's kind of a repeat of what you see in Genesis, ironically, where the serpent says, you'll be your own God. That's why God wants to keep you down. And Crowley and these different systems offer the same thing. And I have a book over there by I forget the name, Eleanor Kreeft or Crete or something like that. She's some sort of Kabbalistic academic mathematician woman. And in her book, she says, well, one of the things that's fascinating about Kabbalah is that it offers man this ability to, through magic or technology, to become his own God. So I think that a lot of people think and believe that they're going to, achieve some kind of apotheosis. Do you ever see that? It's a really silly '90s movie, but it's the Stephen King story, Lawnmower Man. Have you ever watched that?
No.
You should watch it. It's pretty funny because basically there's this retarded guy, and he's literally retarded. I'm not saying he's an idiot, like an actual retarded guy who's like a lawn care dude. And Pierce Brosnan experiments on him to see if he can like raise the guy's IQ using the internet, which was kind of new at the time. And the guy ends up becoming this sort of deity in the internet world because he gets like this massively high IQ and he tries to sort of take over the world. So Lawnmower Man is a good, funny example of what I'm trying to say here.
Right. So, I mean, then you contrast that with the Orthodox Christian way to view the world and the idea of theosis, something that I've been looking into a fair bit recently. How would you, if you had to explain the idea of what theosis is? Because I was watching this. Have you ever seen that YouTube channel, Harmony?
I've not, but I've been hearing about this. People have been saying I should check it out.
Yeah, it's really good. He does breakdowns of various different Orthodox traditions and basically explaining Orthodoxy. And he's very the cinematography is really good. Like it's very artistic. It's a good channel. And he did this video about theosis being the meaning of life. So, I mean, tell me what theosis is.
Yeah, in the Orthodox view, that's what we mean by grace. And, you hear Protestants or Roman Catholics talk about, being saved by grace. We agree with that, but we see grace as more than just sort of God's disposition changing towards us from, anger to love or whatever. We see it as more of an ontological reality of participation. So it's very crucial in the Orthodox view that we're not just being better people or whatever. We're actually participating in the uncreated energies and life and love of God. And that's actually what transforms us. So it's a much more metaphysical, ontological stress in the Orthodox view versus the typical sort of Western Protestant and Catholic view about where you stand legally based on whether you were good or bad. So that's kind of what it is. And in the Orthodox view, we kind of have this idea of there being a process to it of purgation and illumination and deification and illumination. We have this idea of the means of grace, which is the church, the sacraments, confession, prayer, Bible study. All of those things kind of are part and parcel with how we participate in those uncreated energies of God. So the big difference between that and apotheosis, or what a lot of these, occult traditions or Kabbalah or whatever are saying, is that for those groups, it's kind of a ritual sort of magical working that you're doing to become God. Whereas for us, we're never going to become God in some replacement or identity sense, but we can participate in God and become like God through grace. So it's two very different positions.
And that's sort of God's intention is for you to be to like sort of live in his image as much as possible, and to sort of shed the passions and these sorts of things, and prepare yourself in this life to be able to participate in those energies. Like I'm reading this book that I'm reading, The Soul After Death. One of the things that they're talking about in the part that I'm in at the moment is the toll houses. Before when the soul leaves the body, it goes through these toll houses, and it goes through a series of tests, if you will, where different passions will be presented to you, and the demons will try and make their case, and the angels will try and make their case. And it kind of makes sense when I think about it, because you would have to share, like, you're not going to be in communion with God in any way if your soul is unclean, and if you have all of these different passions that you're sort of a slave to, because God's not going to allow that into his orbit, right? So this is the idea that you have to sort of cleanse yourself and resist the passions and shed those things so that you can eventually be almost like face to face with God. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the idea is that when we die, there's there's still probably attachments that we have, and the purpose of that process after death is to get rid of any of those those passions that we're still sort of maintaining, as you said. So one of the reasons in the Orthodox Church that we pray for the dead is because we believe that there is still that efficacy of the church and its sacraments, even when a person who's died in the church moves on. So yeah, you absolutely nailed it. And I think it's fascinating too that and I think Father Seraphim Rose, it's been probably 15 years since I read that book, but I remember Father Rose says something to the effect of, when you look at even the other ancient world religions, like they still have this same idea, like the Tibetan Book of the Dead or Egyptian Book of the Dead. They have this idea of the journey after death. And, that's not alien to the Christian tradition either, especially in the Orthodox world.
Yeah. So this is one thing I do wonder. It kind of makes sense to me when I think about the history of humanity. I actually got this from watching one of your videos. You did there's like an old video that you've done. It's about 20 minutes or so, where you're describing the history of humanity, basically. And that you have the you have the fallen angels that have dominion over the world. Christ comes along, he defeats death. And then now we have the ability to be able to have power over demons because we have the power of Christ, and he came and defeated sin and death and these sorts of things. So before Christ, all of these other ancient religions, Hinduism and all of the different pagan religions and everything, were all essentially manifestations of demons terrorizing human beings. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think there's a little bit more to it in that. I did a good podcast many years ago, maybe 6-7 years ago, with Seraphim Hamilton, and we did a whole assessment of kind of ancient history from the Orthodox Christian perspective in terms of Genesis and then the world perhaps before the flood, which the idea there would be that even in Genesis, you kind of have proto-Christianity. So all the religions derive from a very early Genesis era proto-Christianity. So the reason that there's what we call the logos spermaticos, or the seeds of the truth of the logos, even in all the other religions, whether Hindu or Buddha or whatever, like the reason that's there is because we would say the original religion was actually proto-Christianity. So over time, what happens is, the descendants of Noah that lived in China or wherever, like, they had this seed form of the truth that they remembered from their ancestors back, in the ancient era. But what happens is that over time it gets corrupted, it sort of fades. People start to worship, the things of the earth. They worship the demons, etc. And that message gets perverted. But there's still some truths in those religions. So I think that sort of understanding it from that perspective, which is kind of unique to our view, that proto-Christianity. There's another book that touches on this from the sort of the Eastern perspective, which is Christ the Eternal Tao, written by one of the students of Father Seraphim Rose, where he talks about how you can find a lot of the Orthodox Christian ideas, even in like Taoism and Confucianism and so forth, precisely because there is perhaps this proto-Christianity.
Yeah. All right. So when I go around to Eastern Asian countries, for example, Indonesia, these sorts of different places, and I always notice that there is a lot of demon worship going on. They actually create, like when I was in Bali, they do this day of silence, and they literally create effigies of demons, and they walk them around the street. And I was taking photos of them because it all made sense to me after I'd heard this sort of information. They walk them around the street in order to cleanse the island of bad spirits, and then they will burn the demons. And it's this warfare where they seem like terrorized by the demons, and it just seems like a crazy religion to be subscribed to, because Christianity, we believe that we obviously have power over these demons, but these people, they're like terrorized by them. It's like a fight against them. But we still have that fight against demons, but it's just so pervasive in these Eastern religions.
Yeah, I think one of the things that happened when you have the perversion of the religion, whether it's in the ancient world or now, like what happens is that you end up, as Paul says in the New Testament, you kind of fall prey to being subservient to the thing that you're worshiping. So when man turns away from God, and as he says in Romans 1, you worships and serves the creation rather than the creator, you end up being enslaved to that. And that enslavement is, as the church fathers would say, really rooted in a kind of demonic power or activity. So you might be worshiping the stars, or you might be worshiping, a totem figure, or you might be an animist or whatever. But behind that worship, there is some sort of an enslavement, entrapment that entraps the spirit and the mind into thinking that you must placate these lesser powers and lesser deities and forces in order to get what you want, a harvest, the crops next season. And so when you do that, it just really, it's worse off for you. And that's the irony, is that people I think that, just like with the transhumanists, they think in this bargain, I'll get something special out of this. I'll get to be God. But it's the same kind of in paganism. You're placating these deities through rituals or rites, or even perhaps self-harm. At times you have to do that, like in, some of the shamanic or voodoo traditions. You have to actually hurt yourself to get the spirits to give you what you want. And, all of that is just enslavement, as the New Testament says. And so Christ sets us free, and we're not in bondage to any of the lesser elements, lesser deities, etc.
Yeah, another time my friend was doing a breath work. I don't know if I told this to you. Maybe I told
I think you did.
Deep
Yeah, you
Lead.
told me about that.
Yeah, that when we were doing the breath work thing, and then
It seemed to be demonic.
Yeah, and they started saying that we're going to welcome in the spirits, and I just sort of like, what the fuck? They said we're going to welcome in the feminine goddesses, but it was a big red flag. But in
So you were in the gay program too.
yeah, dude. Yeah, just briefly, I got out of there. But like, the thing was though that they are always really consciously aware of this as well. They're like, really be careful when you're doing the meditation, because you don't want to welcome in the wrong sort of spirits. And it's like, well, when I pray, I guess I don't really have to worry about that so much. But Christians do still have to worry about that sort of, like we were talking about before, about apparitions and these sorts of things. We do still have to worry about that demonic influence. Like, what's the actual difference there?
Yeah, I've heard a couple Orthodox priests and spiritual advisors kind of make an analogy to one of the main differences is that a lot of times when a person is serious about orthodoxy, they've come into the church, this kind of an experience tends to be more external to them. And before a person's in the church, a lot of times these manifestations can be more internal, right? So in other words, actually sort of the spirit within a person, these manifestations kind of coming out of the person up to like full on possession. Because like you, I mean, I've been around people sort of in meditation, new age, intentional type settings, or guys that were like experimenting with shrooms and that kind of stuff. I had a bad trip when I was, I think, 17. So, my assessment of those experiences is definitely that there was definitely something internal. People were manifesting, speaking in other voices, very sort of, almost animalistic types of aggression and voices that people would have when they were on these bad trips. Something else was running the ship, you know what I mean? So I think, demons is a perfect explanation of that. But I think when you're serious about Christianity, it's not so much that the demons kind of manifest in that way, because you're probably not going to be tripping shrooms, but you're going to be battling more so with external temptations, to lust or to whatever.
Right. All right, man. Well, let's read a few of these super chats out, and then I want to get more into debate talk, into debate tactics, these sorts of things. Mighty Maximus, a great supporter of the channel, says, "This is a great collab, Jay. You're a legend. Great interview so far, Jake." Thank you very much, sir. Mighty Maximus also said, "Send another 20 for the mods and 20 for the chat." Thank you very much, man. Witzius sent 5 Rattlesnake TV memberships. Much appreciated. And so did Michael the Pilot. Be safe up there, Michael. Real Rain says 10 for 10. Hey, Jay, one thing I wanted to ask you is, why do you think it was so easy for Christianity to spread through Scandinavian pagan European countries?
It's a good question. I mean, the only thing I can think of that immediately comes to mind is that there was a lot of Christianization of the literature that happened by the monastic communities at that time. And we actually studied this in one of my grad lit classes, that the monastic groups that were missionizing those people would actually take their myths and they would kind of put Christian themes and elements in that. We even see that with today's version of the Beowulf story, which most scholars believe had, some Christian revisions. We don't actually know what the original Beowulf story was, because what we have is a sort of pseudo quasi-Christian story. And it's the same with Odin. I mean, I think Odin dies on a tree, this kind of stuff. I think the monks were using their myths, would be my guess.
Right. Joel says, I'm Coptic Orthodox and we reject the Chalcedonian definition of two separate nature. Do you believe the Coptic position is illogical of a unified nature?
It is. And, natures, you can't have two things be a nature, because a nature is what it is to be that thing. That's the Aristotelian definition of a nature. And so there's no such thing as a tertium quid divino human nature. We do believe in a real ontological change in the human nature of Christ, but you can go watch my lecture series that myself, David Urhan, and Kai from Orthodox Shahada, we're about 5 lectures into critiquing Oriental Orthodoxy.
And The Cut says, this has been a fantastic interview. I'm a fan of both Jake and Jay. Do we get to see you guys team up in a debate anytime soon?
I'd love to. I mean, I've watched Jake's debates. I've seen 2 or 3. I think Jake's a good debater, very talented. He does really well. Super smart dude. So, I mean, I'm always down, yeah.
Yeah, thanks, man. I appreciate that.
If we could find somebody that would, it's hard to find opponents, so I don't know.
Yeah, something like a feminism debate would be awesome.
That'd be fun,
to team up on. All right, man. So speaking of debate, something that I've gotten into just the last few years, it helps me to understand the world and it helps me to be able to think through ideas when you learn the rules of debate, because one of the things that you always do when you're debating is you'll call out logical fallacies, and people find that annoying when they watch you if they're not really somebody who understands debate, because they're like, oh, this guy's just so focused on semantics. But that's the rules of the game. That's like, if the debate was a chessboard, you can't just grab your castle and move diagonally. That's against the rules. And if somebody does that, you're going to be like, hey, put your castle back. You can't do that. So it helps me to understand and think through ideas, right? So if there's something that I'm trying to figure out, is this true? Is this false? You can sort of attack it from a few different angles and find fallacies and find flaws in the argumentation. So what are the first steps for understanding debate from the casual observer?
You made the first point, which is step number 1, just to realize that it's not just a domain of playing a game, or it's not semantics and wordplay. It's not about who can be louder or talk more or whatever. None of that is really what debate is. Debate is, like you said, best compared to a chess match, or some sort of game where there's rules and everybody's bound by the same rules. And even if you don't recognize that as an opponent, if your opponent doesn't recognize that, that's actually an advantage that you have, right? Because if you know the rules of the game well enough and your opponent doesn't, even if they don't believe that there's rules, you can actually demonstrate to them that they're making a huge mistake on their own terms. So it's very effective, first and foremost, to learn the informal fallacies. You're not going to necessarily memorize all of them, but you need to know some of the most basic ones that happen all the time, because you'll notice those happen in not just debate settings, which most people probably aren't in a debate setting, but they happen in mass media. They happen in conversations that you're having with your spouse. They happen when you're at Thanksgiving dinner and your uncle's trying to argue for, why we need to go into war somewhere, right? Because propaganda relies on fallacies. So deconstructing media or war propaganda requires that you know basic reasoning skills to, for example, not fall into a non sequitur. That's one of the most common fallacies. And to just recognize and know that one would get you way ahead of the game, because a lot of times people will, let's take Candace as just a case example. I know we've moved on in the conversation, but one of the things that keeps happening in Candace's assessments is non sequiturs. In other words, she will say a series of things that may or may not be true or partially true, and then she has a conclusion on the basis of these pieces of data or evidence that don't necessarily follow. But if the audience is a bunch of wine moms and they're not perceptive enough to catch that, they're going to, oh yeah, honey, she was right when she said that. Well, it doesn't follow from the fact that this guy was at the base in, Fort Huachuca, and this guy is on the record causing a disturbance at the base, and they arrested him, and that this other guy happened to be there the same day at the base. It doesn't follow from those three things that there was a planned assassination of Charlie Kirk. So in other words, it's not saying it didn't happen necessarily. It's just simply saying that you cannot conclude logically from those three things that necessarily Charlie Kirk was assassinated or the assassination was planned there on those pieces of data. It just simply doesn't follow. And a lot of people will think when you say non sequitur that it means, oh, you're saying that it didn't happen. No, it's just simply saying that you cannot conclude that. Okay. And you guys probably noticed there's a guy who's been doing a lot of debates lately, Alex Soren, and he's an Orthodox apologist who's gaining an audience recently because he's a lawyer. And so lawyers, for example, are almost kind of intuitively familiar with a lot of these ideas, because even if they didn't study logic or logical fallacies in college or law school, like they're still using the same principles even if they don't know the words, right? Because if you're in a courtroom, right, and we've all watched law movies or courtroom dramas, it's doing the same stuff. You're
right.
saying, okay, you've got this testimony that you were at the house and somebody saw you walking in and the murder happened that night, right? Is that enough to conclude, therefore, you are the murderer, you're guilty? Well, of course not. You need more than circumstantial evidence to prove or demonstrate guilt. So likewise, you're going to be using these same strategies and techniques in debate that are, again, just kind of an extension of something like a courtroom.
Right. So those are like the logical. It is so true though. When you do look at law and the courtroom, you do have to be aware of non sequiturs, even if you don't know it's a non sequitur. That doesn't logically follow. Therefore, that's not sufficient evidence. So, all right. So learning the basics, the chess match. This is something because over the years of my channel, I've dived into debates. I'm just a bit interested in it, and then you start to view things very differently when you look at it from this paradigm. So when I was a teenager, I used to love the Hitch slap videos, the Christopher Hitchens shutting down Christian. And then eventually when you sort of understand the chessboard, you realize, oh, that was just an appeal to emotion, or that was an appeal to authority, or that was just an anecdote. That wasn't actually a logical argument. And then the Christians, who are a bit more mild-mannered, will be making logical arguments. And even though Hitchens is very charismatic and he's got that English charm and wit and everything, he actually wasn't making good arguments. It was just a series of appeals to emotion and just rhetoric.
Yeah, I remember watching and I enjoy watching some of your debate reviews and streams as well. I remember watching the Sam Harris. I can't remember if it was Sam Harris versus I want to say maybe William Lane Craig, but that's a classic debate example that's good to review if you're new to this topic or you're interested, because in that debate, Sam Harris really just constantly flexes another version of emotional appeal. The whole debate is just him saying, basically, I could never support a religion where this is how women are treated. And could you imagine being in the Middle East and you see this poor, child and having to deal with this? And none of that was an actual argument. It was all, again, just intended to emotionally elicit a response in the audience so that you felt like Sam Harris was making a really powerful case. And emotions are very powerful, especially in propaganda, in advertising, in movies, but they're the exact opposite in debate, right? They have no authority in debate whatsoever. But so many people are trapped in that. They think that the way that they feel about a subject, or the way that the argument made them feel, or this is why you see, for example, so many people get hung up on the way Andrew debates, or the way that I debate, or the way that you debated somebody. Oh, but you were so aggressive and you talked loud. Okay, but none of that has anything to do with whether what I said was true or false. You may not like it, but again, this is another common one. This is called a psychological report. The fact that you weren't convinced, the fact that you didn't like it, the fact that you found this unconvincing has nothing to do with whether it's true or false. It's simply a psychological report, totally irrelevant, right? I mean, imagine being in the courtroom and and you say, well, Your Honor, I don't really find the prosecution's interrogation of me very convincing. Okay, so what?
I don't like their tone.
We don't care. So in the same way, you'll notice like a lot of debate is really just kind of filtering out the noise and getting to what's actually being said and divorcing that from, everybody knows about ad hominem, right? Like, well, you know what, Jake, you made some really interesting points, but you cheated on your wife, so I don't really have to listen to anything you say. That's a fallacy, right? Because Jake's cheating on his wife, not that he did, but would have nothing to do with would have nothing to do with whether the argument that he said about this or that was true. And sometimes there are exceptions, which I think really low tier noobs don't realize. Like, there would be an exception, for example, if we were debating whether Jake cheated on his wife, then it would be appropriate to bring in the evidence or the arguments that he cheated, right? That wouldn't be ad hominem. So there are some, anomalies which are in the minority where you would have to be against the man, but that wouldn't be a fallacy. That would be just the nature of what we're debating.
Yeah, and also, for example, the Mitch Snow thing, because that was purely relying on his sort of eyewitness testimony. There wasn't any evidence there. It was just like, is this guy a reliable source? And people were saying, well, it doesn't matter about all of the other fraud things that he's done because it doesn't like sort of necessarily say whether it's true or false. But it's like, no, his character and his past here is really the only thing that we can go off.
No, that's a great analogy to where you would want to get into the credibility of the witness. So in other words, when we have a situation where, as Candace was doing, she was sort of hinging a lot of her position on the star witness. And then if the star witness's testimony and life is not credible, that means his arguments and his claims are not credible. And that's exactly what would happen in a courtroom. Right. If you watch any, I mean, I'm not a law courtroom person, but if you watch any courtroom drama, right, you get the lawyer will try to question the credibility of the claims of the person, right? So that's absolutely, totally not ad hominem, right? I mean, if somebody had said, Mitch Snow's arguments and claims are false because he cheated on his wife, that might be an ad hominem. But if we're saying Mitch is not a credible person because he has a history of lying and not being credible, that's not an ad hominem.
Right. So when I'm going to use a boxing analogy here, right? So in my years in the gym, some of the biggest, there's always mistakes that you see with guys who are coming up and wanting to do fights, and even the younger guys who want to become pro. Sometimes they'll get a bit sidetracked. They'll be focusing on girls too much, and they'll be focusing on partying too much, this sort of thing. Sometimes they're a bit too cocky in the gym. They just like have their guard down all the time, don't think that they need to work on defense, and then they'll get caught a lot. Early career, if you get caught a lot. Sometimes they'll rely too much on aggression and power and these sorts of things. There are all different kinds of mistakes that people make in a boxing format that will make them ultimately not be able to live up to their potential. Or sometimes you just see things and you're like, you're just not cut out for this because your attitude is just wrong, or because you just don't work hard enough, any of these types of things. So what are some of the things that you see in terms of debaters that you think are some of the most common mistakes?
Great analogy. Great question. A lot of times people think that you can win every debate with some kind of easy trick. Like, oh, if I just learn the basics of presuppositional apologetics or the transcendental argument, I can just use that trick on everybody. And that might work for a lot of, normie coworkers, or, somebody that you're debating with at the coffee shop or the bar, and they don't know anything about philosophy. But that's not going to work if you debate somebody more sophisticated, in a debate setting, right? Or if your atheist buddy says, oh, come talk to my friend, he's a professor, and, try your tag argument on my professor buddy. That's probably not going to work, because the professor is going to know a lot more things about, problems in philosophy, problems in that type of argumentation, and they'll probably be able to trip you up. So a lot of people, I think, get a little cocky when they learn tag really quick, and then they think that they can just run that on anybody, and they don't know a lot more about epistemology. So I would say it's good to ground yourself in, some basics of epistemology. I would say read something like W.J. Wood's book on epistemology. It's very readable. It's very short. That would help you with debate. I would say go back and listen to all of Dr. Greg Bahnsen's debates, because he's a master at the craft. He's probably one of the best in the last century at debating. I'm not a Calvinist, but he was just, I think everybody recognizes he was just an amazing debater.
And was the guy that you said before, the epistemology book?
W.J. Wood, and it's just called Epistemology. It's part of the It's part of a series. I forget the name of the series, but his installment's good. And if you want something that's a little more advanced, it's more of a grad school text on epistemology. It's Bonjour's text on epistemology. It's a green text by Bonjour. It's commonly used in grad programs, so those are pretty good. But a lot of people don't know anything about epistemology, and they think, well, I can debate and learn a few of the fallacies, and then I can go to these debates, and you're going to do a lot better if you learn the basics. Kind of like you give the analogy to boxing or to fighting, or it's like I could learn guitar and memorize a solo, right? But I'm not going to be able to play in every band and jam with them knowing that one solo, right? You got to learn the basic chord structures. You need to learn, chord progressions, all these different things that are actually going to make you a debater. And so it's the same, I think, in this domain. It's a lesser known art, but it is an art form. And it is part of, you need to know rhetoric. In other words, you need to be able to have a good degree of communication skills that are going to help. So I would focus on some public speaking stuff, learning a little bit of that too, if you want to be serious about debating. But to go back to that main point of another thing that I've seen people make major mistakes, this is a huge one, even for the people that are out doing pop debates, they're really bad about this. And that is not understanding and steel manning the opponent's position. The way to win every debate is to, first of all, want to lose. And I know that sounds kind of corny, but I'm being serious because I want to be committed to the truth to the extent that if I'm wrong, I actually want to be wrong. And if the opponent is correct, then I actually want to lose because I want to be on the right side. So you have to, first and foremost, want and love truth. If you're out for your own gain and you're just debating for the heck of it, like you're not going to get very far. And eventually you're going to lose because you're going to come up against somebody who's actually smarter and better than you. But if you love and are committed to the truth, then even if you're wrong, you're still going to win because truth is what matters the most. And that's what debate's ultimately about, even if people don't recognize that. So last point, just simply that I see so many debaters, they go into debates, they come to the meeting lazy, not knowing the other person's views, not knowing the other person's position. For example, when I did all these Muslim debates, I had to read the most boring, horrible Muslim texts that I never wanted to read. And I had to force myself to do it. That's why it's a lot of work. Again, think about like a court case, right? A lawyer has to know through discovery, right? And all this, like the other side's evidence, their case. You've got to know the other person's position. And I think the way Bonson always said it was something like, he said, you should know the opponent's position to the point that you could state it to their satisfaction. If you can do that, you will be excellent at debate.
Interesting. One of the things I'm just going to bring it back to boxing again for a second. Sometimes you see somebody walk in the gym who's just got it. They're quick. They have a good boxing IQ. They understand distance and range. They have a good temperament. They're not getting angry, these sorts of things. And you're like, all right, yep, that person's got it. What are some of the things that you were recognizing? Is there any debaters that you know who you saw, and you were just like, all right, that guy's got it? And what are the characteristics that you'd look for? Some of the unteachables.
Being able to state your ideas and think quick in a concise way. The older I've gotten, I've noticed the talent and the ability, the skill of being able to take complex ideas or to synthesize a really complex long argument in a very quick, easy way. That's crucial for audience success. So to be able to convince the audience of your position, even if it's really difficult technical ideas, that's a unique skill set that not everybody has. I mean, even to be able to publicly speak is a skill set that not everybody has. A lot of people are afraid of it. They're terrified of it. So those are some of the immediate sort of potentials that you notice, I think, in people. Rhetoric and being charismatic in a debate, which you pointed out when you and Andrew were ranking people. Being funny and being charismatic can go a long way in a debate. I mean, you can't rest everything on that because then it's just fluff and it's just noise. But to be charismatic and to be funny and silly demonstrates, I think, a very convincing element to the crowd, you'll vibe with the crowd better. Being able to think on your feet very quickly, obviously, is a potentiality for debate. And being a reader, I think being able to read books is a big part of it, because we live in a society where people don't debate, and I mean don't read, and then thus they can't debate and communicate their ideas. They haven't thought hard on ideas or deeply on ideas, and being able to debate without ChatGPT, without the internet, is also crucial. So that's another reason why we have to do a lot of in-person or live debates now, because so many people, especially on the left, not so erudite, Destiny clones, these people, they've been caught, trying to use ChatGPT in the midst of debates, and that's just cheating. I mean, imagine being, a chess master, and you're over here like asking the AI what the next best chess move is. It's just retarded.
Yeah, definitely. Is there any of the top tier of debaters in your mind? Are there any guys who you look at and you're just like, damn, like, that guy has really got an airtight worldview, and anybody would be a tough night at the office for them?
Well, there's some people that are really good at debate that don't have the best worldview. But I mean, I think Bonson was probably the best debater, but I don't think that, I mean, you have to get some pretty significant, obviously, flaws in his worldview. Andrew's really good at, I think Andrew has a silver tongue, and he's really good at turning the debate around, really good at internal critiques. That's, of course, a thing that comes out of presuppositionalism and tag. So, Andrew's great. Bonson's great. John Lennox is good. I think John Lennox, I would have given John Lennox a higher place above Trent Horn, honestly, when you guys are ranking it. But I'm trying to think of people that are just really, really good. I mean, it sounds kind of douchey, but like, there's not, I mean, I'll have to say Jim Bob, I've seen like immense improvements in Jim Bob. Constantly impresses me when he's pressing atheists and materialists. I think Jim Bob is getting really good. There's a lot of potential, and I know Alex Soren's only done, I think, one debate so far. He did really well in his first debate. I mean, I think Chase Haggard has a lot of potential. Could be really good at debate. So, I mean, I'm probably missing people. David Erhan did good in his debates. There's a lot of potential, but yeah, I would say elite tier debaters these days. Honestly, Jordan Peterson, if he had been more aggressive, he could have been I feel like he really could have been an elite tier debater, because there were so many points.
Why is that? Yeah.
Well, there were so many points in the Matt Dillahunty debate or the Sam Harris debates where if he had been aggressive, he could have come out and just demolished them. But he would always kind of get up to the point and then kind of back off, probably to maintain friendships and relationships. So I'm not knocking him in some personal way. I'm just saying, like, I feel like he could have really been, just super tier debater if he wanted to.
What do you think his strengths are, Jordan Peterson?
He's a very intelligent, quick thinker. He's very good at turn of phrase and sort of silver tongued and able to synthesize those complex ideas in a very quick, clear way. Also, I think people overlook the fact that doing debate requires the skill of improvisation. So if you've done improv, which when I was actually a theater kid, we used to do a lot of improv, and I think that actually helped thinking on my feet in debate quite a bit. So that's a skill, and I think Jordan Peterson's good at thinking on his feet. So I think that's another key element here.
What do you think it would be the downfalls of Trent, for example? You said that you thought his score should have been lower. What are some of the things that you're most critical of there?
Trent Horn has had some good debates where I think he performed well. He performed well against Alex O'Connor. He performed well against Matt Dillahunty. But to be honest with you, I don't think Alex and Matt are substantial challenges. So, and I don't mean this in a douchey way, but like when I debated Trent, I brought some really hardcore, intense technical material. I gave him a huge reading list. I don't think he read any of it. Same with Tim Gordon. I don't think Tim read any of the reading list that I gave him before the debate. So, I just think Trent has kind of, he lacks some of the aggression that's necessary for debate. And I think there's just sort of a level, and I'm saying this as a student of philosophy, there's sort of a tier and level of philosophy that if you just do kind of a surface level study of metaphysics and epistemology, which I think Trent probably hasn't had no epistemic studies at all, like you're just not going to be able to deal with challenges at an epistemic level. So when I started asking him, for example, questions in our debate about self-evidence or the criterion problem, I mean, those are really well-known fundamental issues in epistemology, and he was kind of out to lunch, had no idea really what that was. So from my perspective, I just think Trent, again, he's a smart guy, there's potential, but there's areas that he just doesn't want to go into and has kind of been too passive about in the last couple of years.
Right. And then Alex O'Connor, because he's kind of seen as the guy on the atheist side these days. He's sort of, it's almost as if he's taken the mantle from the likes of Dawkins Harris and these guys. However, he is probably a lot more charitable to Christianity and open-minded. And it seems as though he's tried to sort of immerse himself in Christianity, but couldn't find the belief, couldn't find the faith, these sorts of things. So what do you think are his strengths and weaknesses?
I mean, I guess strengths would be that anybody that gets a significant audience, has to be able to handle, quite a bit of opposition. And not everybody can handle, hundreds of thousands or millions of people opposing you, right? It's I think a certain type of person that's able to handle that. And not everybody can do that. So those are some strengths. Obviously, he's an intelligent person. He's a quick thinker. But just like with Trent, there's a really sort of vast lack of philosophical knowledge and depth that he doesn't have. So, when he comes up against somebody like a John Lennox or somebody who's got more of an advanced training in some of these fields, they just can't do anything. And I think the Lennox debate was when O'Connor kind of sort of started saying, I don't know if I want to do any more of these Christian debates, because I was actually supposed to have a debate with him on Piers Morgan. And he said,
Okay.
I'll pass. So,
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Why do you think that
I
was?
really wish that had happened. I think it's because, I mean, I'm not saying he spends a lot of time watching me, but I think, again, anybody with a significant degree of philosophical understanding is not, if you don't have that, you're just not going to perform well.
Right. And so when you say he lacks, because he talks about philosophy a lot, and to the untrained eye, like even to me, when I look at him, like, oh, this guy looks like he knows a lot about philosophy. So what other areas that he's lacking?
So, I mean, and how can I say this without sounding like a douchebag? Like if you've gotten, like if you did philosophy grad school type stuff, you're gonna notice people that may have had a few undergrad classes, or I don't know what his degree was, but maybe he did a philosophy undergrad. I don't know, but part of this has to do with the education system, though. Is like a lot of the education system, even if you do a philosophy degree, I mean, there's a lot of gaps. There's a lot of things that are skipped. For example, most modern philosophy programs, you don't study metaphysics. So anybody who brings like a significant metaphysical challenge, like a Roman Catholic would or an Orthodox would, to an atheist debate, an atheist is not going to know what to say because they don't study that. And most atheists and academics, even if they study philosophy, they probably didn't do an epistemology course. I mean, maybe they did Enlightenment epistemology. So they're not going to know things like epistemic justification and what qualifies as justification. So those are they're just very huge gaps that, like, if you don't have that, you're not going to do well against somebody who knows that.
Okay. So then taking it back, so we've got the basics of debate and some of the better debaters out there, some of the flaws in some of the prominent debaters' worldviews and their skill sets. How about just for people who are like just debate enjoyers, just debate watchers? They like to watch the streams, but they've never done any debates in their own personal life. But they look at all this bullshit around them and they want a way to be able to combat them. You get some woke HR lady or lawyer lady or whatever who's telling you about her worldview, and they want to just be able to just fucking clap back. What about for these sorts of people? Where do we start?
I would start with go listen to the Bonson Stein debate about 4 or 5 times all the way through. Take notes. And, when you come to words that you don't understand, look them up. The first thing I did when I got into debating was the debate that got me into it, right? So this was probably about 1999. I listened to that debate on tape, cassette tape. I think I still have the cassette tape somewhere, but and I listened to it multiple times. I started taking notes, and I was like, this is fascinating. I'm going to learn how he does this. How does he, like, lead this atheist into a trap, and kind of set him up. So that's one way to begin to learn. And if you just kind of just even mimicking kind of the way that Bahnsen goes about it, you would be miles ahead of everybody else probably. And I'm saying like for coworkers and for, family members or whoever you're arguing with or whatever. That's a good way to begin to learn to clap back. I would learn, print out. There's a lot of colleges that have, websites that list the informal fallacies. So I would print that out and I would learn a few of those, the more common ones especially, and you'll start noticing them in ads or in people's conversations, I would also, you can go and watch some of the Oxford Union debates, and those are good because they're more classical style. So you'll watch people like Peter Hitchens, and you'll notice the way he uses rhetoric. So I would learn from some of those. Obviously, you could watch some of my debates. You could watch some of Jake's debates, and just see how we go about replying to and clapping back. And one thing, for example, like if you go watch my Shabir Ali debates, one thing that people didn't notice that I think some people later said, "Hey, I appreciate that you did this," was, when you're in a debate with somebody, if it's a cross-examination, for example, like if I'm cross-examining him, I would ask him questions and he would spout out all of this stuff, right? And the more that he said, the more he was giving me information to hang him with, right? But when he asked me, I would give very quick one-word answers. So I didn't give a bunch of blah, blah, blah so that he could trap me with, right? So that's a tactic, but it's a tactic that's useful in these kinds of engagements or in these kinds of discourses, right? So I would say you can learn some of those kind of tactics. You can't rely totally on tactics, because if you do, it's going to kind of be evident, even to people that are not trained in debate. They're going to be like, "You're just using, tactics and tricks, dude." But you need to know some strategies and tactics, even
especially when they're used against you as well. Hey,
absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. I'm going to read a few more super chats, and then I've got a couple more questions for you, if you don't mind, Jay. You don't have to be anywhere right now, do you?
Sure. No.
Yeah, cool. Thanks, man. All right, great. Where are we at? There goes my Black Queen, says JB. Left-hand assassin sent 5. Thank you. Backman said for 2. The goat. Tell Jake to read the Church Fathers. I'm on it, brother. Thank you. Yamaha Banshi said for Jay, will you ever appear on Piers Morgan Uncensored again anytime soon? If so, just make sure to not share a panel with the guy named Brian Shapiro or John Fuselsang. I would love to see you debate those guys. What's he talking about?
I'm actually not familiar with who those people are, but I did get an email the other day saying that they would like to try to get me back on in the near future. So hopefully, but I never know who they're going to have me on with. Yeah,
definitely. If those guys are on there, do it. You versus Brian Shapiro, Fuselsang would be hilarious. For Jay, I'm just getting into EO theology, first-hand writings. I should get into builds a good foundation. First-hand writings I should get into to build a good foundation.
I would, amongst church fathers, I would read Athanasius's On the Incarnation. It's very small and readable. I would read the 5 theological orations by Gregory Nazianzus, small and readable. I would read Mystical Theology of the Eastern Church by Losky. It's a little more advanced. And I would read, as part of Catechesis, a classic is Pomazansky's Orthodox Dogmatic Theology.
The Cut says for 10, for each of you, one person you would debate, past or present. Can't be a philosopher or president. Thank you to both. For me, it would probably be one of it'd probably be like a TikTok goon, like Harry Sisson or Dean or Parker, one of those guys.
Oh, that'd be great. Yeah, I mean, I'd love to debate Ben Shapiro, Alex O'Connor, Sam Harris, Dawkins, any of those kind of big atheist guys. I'd love to debate them.
Blaine says, smash the like button. Don't forget to send in those supers. Great idea by Blaine. Left-handed assassin with another 5. And Mighty Maximus says, for the goal, thank you, sir. Papaya Terry comes in and says, I tried mimicking Jay in a debate and I got called a BSN, then punched in the face. I think I still need to learn. Yeah, Papaya Terry is a way you got to go about it,
Well, I've actually been pushed and punched a couple times. So
really?
Debates can get heated. Yeah.
Sniper Mike sent 10. Thank you, sir. Guys, we've got how many we've got to go? We've got 10 to go, yellow and up, to get to that goal. 10 yellow and up. If you've enjoyed the debate, then let's hit that goal. Let's do it. All right, Jay. So I just want to talk to you quickly about the future of orthodoxy, because I'm noticing a huge change. Like, I was messaging you the other day after I left my liturgy. I don't even know if it's appropriate to say on stream, but that there was a bunch of guys who'd come up to me and I started talking to you, because in the Orthodox Greek Church in Australia, it's very like, it's like a community, and it's hard for outsiders to come in sometimes, and no one talks to them because it's all like the Greek community and then the Serbian community and the Russian community, whatever. And so people are coming in, staring up at the ceiling, the beautiful icons and the beautiful paintings and everything. But so we're trying to make an effort to talk to people more, to people like newcomers in the church. It's their first time. And there was like 5 or 6 just the other night that I spoke to. I was like, oh, so what brought you here? And they're like, oh yeah, I was just watching Jay Dyer debates on the internet. And I was like, damn, like all the way here in Brisbane, Australia. So I'm seeing a huge amount of people who are looking into orthodoxy, but maybe struggling a little bit when they're going into the church, because it's like there's like no one really approach. Maybe it's just in my church. I think it's better in America because you have a lot more English speaking churches. Like in my state, there's only a few churches that do English speaking services, which I find bizarre. But how are you seeing that? Are you seeing a big shift towards orthodoxy? And what do you think that the future of the church looks like in terms of like being able to accommodate for people in different lands and places? Like your average Australian who wants to go to an Orthodox church.
Yeah, there is a pretty wild sort of explosion of this. I mean, even to the point of Associated Press reported on it the other day. Wall Street Journal's reported on it. I've had mainstream media outlets reach out to try to interview me. Actually, I always say no because I don't trust like mainstream reporters. So that's happened 2 or 3 times where I'm like, no, I'm not talking to you. But yeah, I mean, I think they ended up, talking to Father Josiah Trenum, and I think they talked to maybe Pajot and some other people. But I mean, there is an increase for sure, a surge. Most in America, a lot of parishes are experiencing doubling or tripling. My parish in Florida, for example, I mean, we've I think tripled in the last 5 years. We've had to expand, space wise, spatially. So it is happening. I don't really know what the experience of those kinds of churches is in other countries. I know that Orthodoxy is expanding quite a bit in Germany. I've met a lot of German ortho bros, and I hear a lot about Australia. So that's good. One thing I would say is like, yeah, a lot of times, not always, but a lot of times it will be an ethnic community, and they're just being themselves. And Orthodoxy is not like Protestantism or mega churches where it's like, oh, we're just clamoring to try, to get anybody in under any circumstances, right? So it's a very different model. And part of the reason for that, and it was a little me too when I first started looking into this, is like they want to make sure that you're serious. That's why you don't become Orthodox like at a Billy Graham crusade when you're evangelical, right? You just come on down to the altar and say the sinner's prayer. We'll give you some pizza. Like it's not like that, right? Like so they want to make sure it's going to take you time, and that kind of the initiative is kind of left up to you. But most people's experiences, even if it's Greek churches or whatever, like if you approach and you initiate and say, hey, I'm interested, I'd like to come to inquirers classes or whatever, that's the stage before becoming a catechumen. And usually the catechumen period is anywhere from 6 months to 3 years. So it really just depends on what they decide at that church. So I would just say it's just not evangelicalism. It's more of a firewall to make sure that people are serious.
Right. And so for people who are inquiring and who are interested in orthodoxy, but maybe a little bit intimidated to go down to, it's not like the Protestant churches where you walk in and it's very sort of like, hey, how are you? Yeah. Come sit down here. We're going to be playing some music and everyone's, dancing along. It is a little bit more serious in the Divine Liturgy. And I actually really like that because when I go to church, it's a very deep, like serious, contemplative sort of time. And I like the aesthetic beauty and the reverence and everything. I really like that sort of stuff, but it might be a bit different for people who are even just inquiring into Christianity or people who are coming from a Protestant background. So what would you say to those sorts of people?
Yeah, it is different. And you got to give it time. So, don't rush it. Never rush it. When I was first looking at Orthodoxy in 2007, I was really anxious. I tried to rush it and ended up like not being ready for Orthodoxy until about 10 years later. So, yeah, there's no rush. Take your time. ask all the questions that you have, get all the questions out. That's really the only thing I can think of. And a lot of websites have kind of church decorum or etiquette. So you can look up and see kind of what, the proper Orthodox Christian church etiquette is. Don't come in there praying and, like an evangelical service and raising your hands and hooting and hollering. It's none of that. So, it's very liturgical, which means ordered ritual-based service, which is how God's always been worshipped, whether it's the Old Testament, when Jesus went to the synagogue, it's a very ordered liturgical service. Same at the temple, right? And then when the church was established early on, early church was liturgical always. So that's the way that God has laid down that he's worshipped, we believe. So anything that seems a little weird or new, I remember the first time when I was I was raised Protestant. I remember the first time I saw a relic, I was like, oh, this is weird. Over time, all that goes away. It's not weird at all. So just give it time.
Yeah, one of the things I've also noticed is that guys are coming in there and they've got their wives, and the wives are really sort of worried about the community and this sort of thing. Like they go to the Protestant, they've got the mothers clubs and everything, and the Orthodox churches, maybe it's harder to break into a community and maybe they're not as focused on that sort of thing. So what would you say to maybe guys who are looking into it but their wives or girlfriends are not as interested?
Yeah, that can be a challenge. I mean, when I first I go to Russian church, and it took a while. It took maybe 6 months to a year before I really felt like, I actually have camaraderie with these people. But, I had a really good, providentially speaking, really good spiritual father. So we've always had a really good relationship. And I think that was a huge part of it. But for wives, I think you're right. Girlfriends, like they want to meet the, other girls and have community and all that. And I would say that, one thing that's unique about Orthodox Church is that's a big plus in this regard, is that it may be different in the Greek church there, I don't know, but in most American Orthodox churches, like the children are a huge part of the liturgy. The children sing, the children participate, they commune. So that's something that I think they might be able to bond with other women about, especially is the kids and the communion aspect of it. You don't send your children off to some other service or keep them away. But yeah, again, that might be a challenge in places like where you are. I'm not sure. I'm only really familiar with the American experience, so I don't know what it's like in Europe or Australia.
Yeah, I went to Serbia a few months ago, and I went to the Church of Saint Sava. Unbelievable, dude!
Oh, cool. Wow.
They've got millions of, what do they call it? With like when you put the paintings, but they're not paintings. They're done with the little pieces of gold and pieces of
like mosaics.
Yeah, mosaics. Yeah, but there's millions of pieces that go into all of the mosaics around it. It's like literally unbelievable when you look at it. That it was all just the amount of effort and planning that would have gone into it, and it's just beautiful. So
you've probably experienced more of the world of Orthodoxy than I have, because I've only been to. We did go to a few Orthodox churches in Italy, so that was fascinating. But I've only experienced America and Italy, really.
Yeah, it is fascinating. I went to a service as well in Serbia there, and the singing was on point. Because I've only been to a few. I've been to Andrew's one, been to the Greek one where I'm from here in Brizzy, and then been to the Serbian one in Belgrade as well. And this, like, they had the choir up the back, and then they had the church, and the priest would say something, then the choir would say it, and the priest, then the choir, like proper, like great service. Everybody's standing. There's no seats the whole entire time. So yeah, super cool. Like, really, really enjoy the Orthodox services. So, going to keep it. Let's read a few more of these super chats, shall we? Does Brian Shapiro have time for a debate, considering he's constantly stalking Rob, says Marty Maximus? I'm sure he'd do it if Piers Morgan called him again.
Yeah.
Papaya Terry said, dangerous loaf of bread wants to know what got you pushed and punched over in debate. I got you, bro.
It was actually at a monastery, and it was an academic conference at a Orthodox monastery, and I just got there, and there was this sort of big, burly, sort of chunky Viking-looking dude who's a professor, a libertarian professor of ethics, oddly enough, who was at this conference, and he was there to present a paper, and I was there, and we didn't know each other, but we started talking, and I think everything that I was saying, he was just kind of interpreting it in the worst possible light, and the conversation just got worse and worse. It got more and more heated, and he was starting to get really red faced. And I'm the kind of person who I tend to continue like a provocation. Like if somebody's like in my face, and like I don't like just walk away. I like okay, and I remember saying something like, this is an academic debate. I'm like, what are you actually going to do? And that set him off, and he sort of it was like a he didn't really know what to do, and he just sort of punched me, and I went sort of rolling over a table, and you had all these monks and nuns, or like just sort of like. They couldn't believe that somebody punched a guy at a monastery. So that's pretty crazy.
Oh, that's hilarious.
Yeah, it was 2019, I think.
Blaine sent 20 Rattlesnake TV memberships. He's blessed 20 paws with a membership. Thank you very much, Blaine. That is greatly appreciated, my friend.
By the way,
€5.
That was a true story. Father Deacon Ananias was there. He can attest
Really?
to that. Does it really happen? Yeah.
Got beaten up by a Viking. Eddie Garcia sent 5 and says, I was Protestant, then atheist, then mega church, and now I'm black-pilled. How can I get out? I'm in Berlin, Germany.
There's a large, growing, sizable Orthodox population in Germany now. So find a good Orthodox church. You'll find some good Germanic Orthobros.
Yeah, I was in Berlin as well recently. In September, and you just got to stay away from the downtown. Like Berlin is one of the most degenerate places I've ever been to. You go down to the downtown part, and it's just sex, drugs, and rock and roll down there. So stay away from those parts. It's pretty funny. I was gone.
Go ahead. Well, Dr. David Patrick Harry, he met his wife out there. I think she's from Austria, but she was the one saying, "Hey, there's like hundreds and hundreds of guys in Germany that are becoming Orthodox now." Yeah,
that's awesome. But yeah, I was down there at the Berlin Wall, and have you ever seen that mural of the two guys kissing?
No.
On the Berlin Wall,
No.
It's like when the Berlin Wall fell, they did all the murals on the Berlin Wall, and one of these is a mural of these two guys kissing, and it was a Soviet guy and a Soviet communist and a German communist, and they were doing the fraternal kiss. Where they go kiss, 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 and then for some reason, I didn't know this, but for some reason they just start kissing each other. Like if they're like really like, we're in this together, me and you, bro, it's communism until the wheels fall off, they'll actually kiss each other. Like how sus is that? And so these guys, and that's what the painting is of, but all of the wokies in Berlin think that when the Berlin Wall, the East and West, they got together and started kissing each other. But yeah, the fraternal kiss, it's a real thing in socialism. Sus socialists.
That's weird too, because the tendency for the gay stuff actually in the Cold War was actually the West and the CIA that were actually pushing and promoting the sexual liberation side of it, because the official Soviet line was anti-homosexuals. They were actually using that as leverage in the Cold War. I'm not pro-Soviet. I'm just saying it's odd that it's interpreted that way now.
Yeah, but I don't think it's meant to be an explicitly gay thing, because they would kiss cheek, and then like they'd do this like kiss if it was like a I don't know. Weird shit. 4 away from the goal, guys. We're 4 yellows away from the goal. We're getting very close. Sounds like Jake is a catechumen, says Octavian, and not a catechumen yet. We'll see how we go with that. Alta Void for 10 says, so you're saying if I go to church, then I have to take off my pimp hat?
Only depends on what church you go to.
True.
If you go to a black pimp church, keep it on, buddy.
Yeah. Great Scott says Orthodox Christianity is the only church that makes the New Testament real because it wrote it.
I would agree with that. Yeah.
Rach Wilson says for 20, great to see Rach in the chat. Great to see you guys streaming today. It's like my big brother and my little brother doing a stream. Pretty much correct, hey?
Am I the little bro?
I think I'm the little bro. Amelia sent 14. Thank you very much, Amelia. Much appreciated. Yamaha Banshi says there's an Orthodox church in Japan called Nicolaido. Probably butchered it in case you're trying to find some Orthodox sayings.
Yeah, there is. It's actually quite a few Orthodox churches in Japan, I think.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was looking at, they've got that one in Alaska as well. That's kind of interesting. I was in Indonesia and Bali, and I was at my kickboxing gym, and I was doing pads with some guy, and then he saw my cross. He's like, "Oh, you Christian?" I was like, "Yeah," and he's like, what? And I was like, I'd go to Orthodox church, and he was like, oh, you should come to this Orthodox church we've got in down in the south of Bali. And I was researching one for, I couldn't find one, but apparently there's now a Russian Orthodox church in Bali as well. And apparently in the north of Bali, there was a big mass conversion that happened where there's a whole massive Orthodox community up there. So, I mean, lots of stuff.
I never even heard of that. That's great.
Yeah. Mighty Maximus came in with 3 times 10. Thank you, Mighty Maximus. Much appreciated. That goal has been absolutely smashed, guys. Appreciate that. Qtard for 10 says, thanks for the story, Mr. J. For the goal, Mr. Jake. Thank you, sir. Anthony says, I struggle actually consistently going to church. Am I making excuses for myself? I know I should be there. Is this normal?
I think everybody has that struggle. Yeah, absolutely. We're all going to have the same passions that we battle. I mean, some of us will battle one passion versus another, but yeah, absolutely.
Yep. All right, Jay. Well, I really appreciate your time today, man. Tell everybody, your links are all in the description, everything, all of the website, YouTube, all these sorts of things. But what can we expect from you, and where's the best places to find you?
Thanks, Jake. Always have fun talking to you. Really good show. Love your content too, by the way. You can find me at jaysanalysis.com. You can subscribe there to the archives. You can get my books, signed copies, Esoteric Hollywood 1, 2, and 3, and the philosophy text as well in the shop. You can find me on Twitter, Dyer. You can find me Fourth Hour, the Alex Jones Show, mostly on Fridays. You can find me Sam Hyde Show. We wrote 1 full season of the Sam Hyde Show, so I think we'll be starting season 2 soon. Yeah, and then everywhere else on social media, same name.
All right. Well, don't forget to like the stream, guys. I'm going to stick around for a little bit and chat with you guys. But Jay, always a pleasure, man. I'll see you very soon.
Thanks, Doc. Have a good day.
See you later, dude. How good, guys. Always fun having Jay on the channel. Always fun to pick his brains about things. What did you guys think? I want to do more interviews this year, get more into interview content. I really, really enjoy the interviews. I might do a few debates and everything still here and there, but I really enjoy the interview content. The debates are cool and everything, but I miss doing interviews, picking people's brains. Rob Nor's streaming over here, or David Patrick Harry's streaming as well. Let's go DPH, because you guys will probably be a bit more interested in DPH content after Jay. All right, guys, we're going to go over to DPH. He's streaming over there. Thank you so much for joining me. Much appreciated, guys. Much love. Take care of yourselves.